Number 10. Martian Manhunter and Fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America number 255. Number 9. The Flash and being too fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedster their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of the Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8. Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5.
In at 7, open spaces. Imagine this. You're Peter Parker. You're chasing after a villain who's committed a slew of crimes and put innocent lives in danger. While tracking them down, your investigation takes you to a big, wide open area, like a rural field or some other vacant land with relatively flat ground. And that is when you get jumped. But guess what? There's nothing to shoot off your webs and swing around from. Sure, you can jump and be acrobatic and whatnot, but if there's one thing that Marvel's PS4 Spider-Man video game has taught us, it's that Spidey dominates when he's up in the air. And it is much easier to get hurt or shot at when you're on the ground. Open areas also provide a lack of cover, which may not help out other heroes who lack the invulnerability that others have in their skill set. All in all, city's good. Big open desert spaces, probably very bad. Unless you've got like a camouflage ability, in which case this list is not for you. Moving on to something very ridiculous, but also fairly accurate.
Number 6. Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe to toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1.
Number 5. Cyclops. While Scott is trained to have great control over his powers, he's nothing without his visor, or his more casual sunglasses if we're talking about the film starring James Marsden as Cyclops. The ruby quartz lenses, or long single lens, help Scott to see without having to worry about shooting everyone up with his optic blasts, while his combat visor also allows him to direct his optic blasts in more specific ways, controlled by a ton of buttons that are in his gloves that allow him to change the mirrors and the screen in his visor so that he can manage all kinds of masterful targeting when it comes to taking down enemies. But if he loses his glasses or his visor, he actually can't see because he has to keep his eyes closed, and his powers become more of a hazard than an asset. This has rendered him useless before in battle and made him terrified to harm those he loves, his fellow X-Men and his longtime love, Jean Grey. I've also wondered if him seeing red means you could use this to your advantage when fighting Cyclops and find a way to sneak up on him, like if you had really good red camouflage made. So like he wouldn't see you. He'd be like, all I see is red. Where's that person?
Number 4. Gladiator and self-confidence. Cal Lark, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and, despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107.
Moving on to number 3, low confidence. Captain Britain, Gladiator, and Zatanna all share this weakness. Low confidence, especially in the superhero community, is one that can really punch you in the gut and lead to dire consequences. Generally, when this is a weakness of a superhero's, the more confidence they have, the better they are in combat. And then the opposite, the less confidence they have, the worse they are in combat. While some villains have taken advantage of this over the years, you would think that demoralizing and humiliating superheroes would be way more of a trend in the criminal community, since it's proven so effective on some other heroes. Just saying. I mean, I feel like that's a low though. Just go around on the superhero social media accounts and bully them online as some anonymous troll. Just make them feel terrible about themselves, and then they get out there and they're like, everyone hates me, and then they get beaten up by a villain. It's a hard life for a hero. You gotta have tough skin.
Number 2, Green Lantern and wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns. It's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log. And then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940s All-American Comics number 16. Number 1, Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
Number 10. Hope Summers. Hope is one of those mutants who has become problematic for writers because she is just so powerful. She can adopt any other mutant's powers, and there is no limit to how many power sets she can use at once. She doesn't drain the powers from them like Rogue, simply mimics them, but she also gains the peak performance level of their powers as well. And she doesn't have to touch someone to use their abilities, so that's a plus side to one of her weaknesses, I guess. So how do we cap someone like that? How do we make her writable and relatable? Well, usually we make her feel conflicted and want to run away. We've all wanted to run away at some point, right? But for weaknesses, they could have made it a certain ability, a certain power that she just can't use and can drastically cause her harm as a result or something like that. But nope, she's the mutant messiah after all, so instead her weakness is distance. And time, to an extent. So in other words, the easiest way to defeat Hope is just run away from her. If she can't get to you and you have enough distance between you and her, then she can't really mimic your abilities. And really, distance is her only main weakness. Well, unless she gets her hands on a teleporter's abilities, because then she'd have to teleport away from the teleporter, and if she teleports too far away from them, how can she use their abilities? Wait a minute, I feel like this is a weakness that wasn't fully thought through. How does she use teleportation abilities? Does she have to take teleporter with her? What? Number 9, Wolverine. Logan is definitely one of the most popular mutants, if not the most popular, and known for being one of the coolest and toughest mutants out there. So, what's he doing on this list? Well, not everything about him is as cool as you think, but one thing especially, that is his weakness to magnets. Now, granted, this makes sense. His adamantium skeleton is one of his greatest strengths, although likely it can be his greatest weakness in a way, as in old age it kind of poisons him. But beyond that, it also becomes a weakness when he comes up against anyone with magnetic powers, namely, you guessed it, Magneto. Magneto actually once used his power to rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. Ouch. Actually, I feel like he maybe has done this more than once in the comics, proving just how deadly this weakness can be for Logan. While it's no joke, and it does make sense, it just sounds ridiculous, and it makes me think of Wolverine falling to his knees if we were just to cover him in fridge magnets. And I know we'd likely need something stronger than fridge magnets to cause him harm, but still, this imagery is pretty hysterical to me. So if you think of Wolverine's weakness to magnets, it makes sense, but it just sounds ridiculous on paper. Weaknesses, magnets. Number 8, Nate Gray. Nate Gray might be insanely powerful and be able to do pretty much anything, but there is one guy who can cause him some serious harm. That's his kind of alternate version of himself / weird multiverse half-brother, Cable. Nathan Summers. Because these two share such an identical size signature, being in one another's presence actually severely messes with both of them. It causes their powers to go slightly haywire, forcing them to randomly share memories with one another, and even causes them visible pain. This is an especially odd weakness, considering that this doesn't really happen with any of the other alternates, or any of their other alternates, including Cable's evil clone, Strife. I think if it's gonna happen with Nate Gray, shouldn't it happen with Strife? Nor does it seem to be a common occurrence among any other alternates in the Marvel Universe. So, very strange.
Number 7, Adam Strange and forced deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Ran's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Ranians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6.
Number 6. Kitty Pryde, or Captain Kate as she's going by now, has a weird weakness in the sense that her powers are kind of also her weakness. Okay, hear me out. So, for one, she used to have the restriction, and still sometimes does, I think, depending on who is writing her, that she has to hold her breath while phasing. Now, fortunately, this has pretty much been changed because her powers have increased and it was really pretty silly. Like, she has to hold her breath, yet she does all of these things. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. In fact, I think it was such a silly restriction on her powers that Marvel realized, oh, we should maybe change this. But beyond that, as useful as her powers are, they have also gotten her into trouble. So they're both a pro and a con in a way. Like when she managed to phase into that giant bullet, but found herself unable to phase back out due to the material that the bullet was made of and how thick it was. And yet, that material that prevented her from phasing out did not prevent her from phasing into the bullet and phasing her and the entire bullet through the planet Earth. So what is up with that? Also, is that bullet made out of adamantium? Because I couldn't find anything about that, but I know that Kitty Pryde has an issue with adamantium. So I'm just wondering, if anyone knows, let me know.
In at number 5, gun laws. Now, a supervillain could use the lenient gun laws in the US to their advantage. Say that they wanted to gun down a hero and get away with it. Just lure them onto your own property and then fire away and then claim it was self-defense. I know, like I said, this is actually a very dark number because it happens in real life, but not with heroes, with regular people. Now, we wouldn't be surprised to see something like that legally work out in favor of our hypothetical villain here. Although, that is kind of just strictly the US. That smug trick would not work in Canada, or a lot of other countries in the world.
Number 4, Rogue. Rogue's main weakness is actually herself. Later on in her story, we learn that it is actually Rogue's own fear that holds her back. Her abilities could be controlled if she simply wasn't so afraid of them. Her first kiss with Cody Robbins, which left him in a coma, ended up being the event that created this fear in her and allowed her to believe that she was dangerous for the rest of her life, and as such, she became dangerous. Some self-actualization stuff going on in her story. But once she overcomes this fear, she is actually granted more control over her powers. Now, while I love this story and journey for her, especially because it's kind of relatable if you're the type of person to self-doubt, the revelation of this weakness also changes her character a lot. For a lot of people, the struggle of being so powerful yet so dangerous is what people really love about Rogue. How she is tormented by the fact that she is basically forced to live a life of full-on social distancing, 24/7. So for it to have all been in her head, it feels a little bit like a cop-out. Years of torment could have apparently been avoided if Rogue had just believed in herself more?
Number 3, Daredevil and loud noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises!
Number 2, Gambit. Remy LeBeau often seems to be considered an underrated X-Men. He can create massive explosions using kinetic energy, which he focuses on an object that is charged by his touch and then explodes. He also has great control over his powers. He can charge something with kinetic energy and actually time that explosion, but there are two things that you might have noticed in the comics when it comes to his character. He never seems to charge people or any other organic life forms. So what's up with that? For many, they might just think that Gambit actually chooses not to because, you know, he's a good guy. But it has been debated in the comics that this idea of charging living matter might not even be an option for Gambit. So he can charge anything basically non-living, but nothing that is alive. This is also a weakness that sometimes seems to be forgotten by writers, as it's not been completely consistent or fully explained. So sometimes he can do it, which is weird. And despite the amazing control that he exhibits, this was actually something granted to him by Mr. Sinister. Gambit actually made a deal with Sinister to operate on his brain in order to help him control his powers more, while also kind of limiting them so he doesn't basically go haywire and kill everyone he loves. The results of the surgery are both, of course, a strength and a weakness, as they granted Gambit more control while also limiting his powers somewhat. Also, making deals with Mr. Sinister is just usually ill-advised. The fact that that even happened in a comic with Gambit? It's strange. Number 1. Mastermind. Mastermind can create powerful illusions, ones that feel, smell, sound, taste, and look completely real. For example, if he creates a wall, it will feel like a wall, it'll smell like a wall, it'll taste like a wall. But if you can overcome how convincing this illusion seems, if you can just decide to run through that wall, you'll realize it isn't actually there. And his illusions can only exist as long as you believe them to be true. They require you to believe. So once you shatter one of his illusions, all the others will just come tumbling down after. Jason Wingard also has to concentrate for you to be able to see his illusion. So many people have taken him out in battle simply by distracting him momentarily. He also cannot control who sees his illusions and who doesn't. For example, if he creates a giant butterfly in a room, all who are in the room with it will see it. Anyone who has it within their line of sight will see it. In fact, you could say his weaknesses appear greater than his strengths in a lot of ways. Kind of a weird villain like that. Also, sometimes he's super powerful, sometimes he's not that powerful at all.
In at number 10, sensitive senses. There are a fistful of characters whose powers include some sort of enhanced sense or senses, such as the case with Marvel's Daredevil, a man whose lack of vision doesn't stop him from being a fantastic hero. His accident, while responsible for the loss of his eyes, enhanced his other senses. Now this includes echolocation, an ability in which Matt Murdock can partially see thanks to his hearing acting like a powerful radar, kinda like a bat. But because of this, he's sensitive to loud noises, and in the past we've seen high decibel sounds mess him up. For example, in Daredevil Volume 2, Worst Case Scenario, Purple Man uses ultrasound to leave Matt in an excruciating amount of pain. Now this weakness goes beyond enhanced senses. Villains don't target extrasensory abilities nearly that much either, and you'd think that a foe would use that information of a hero's power and then find a way to overwhelm their minds. Instead, we more frequently see characters who have an invulnerability to psychic attacks being more of a threat to those who use telepathy, or telekinesis. In at number 9, no peripheral vision. This one kinda seems like a given, but I personally cannot think of a single comic in which I've seen this go down. Also, feel free to comment in those comments below and inform me. So, have you seen some of the cowls and helmets on these heroes? It's like wearing horse blinders on your head. The lack of peripheral vision should be a major issue in the superhero community, but we never really see or hear about it, do we? It would be easy to sneak up on some heroes and, being in their blind spot, attack them. Now obviously that wouldn't happen with a hero like Batman who's just like prepared for everything and can probably see out of the back of his head, but that being said, not everyone is Batman. It's also surprising that more heroes don't suffer from tunnel vision either. A self-imposed tunnel vision, that is. In at number 8, unprotected faces. Here's one that we really adore. So, say you're a superhero. You have superpowers and you want to put them to good use. So you whip up a costume and begin a career as a vigilante in your hometown. But a few neighborhood patrols in, you find yourself face to face with an armed criminal. He manages to catch you off guard and points a gun right at you. And bam! Shoots you right in the face, specifically where your mouth is, because like many other superheroes, you wear a cowl or a helmet that covers the top of your head and your eyes and the sides, but is lacking in the lower half of your face, leaving that area exposed. Now imagine if someone got close enough to Batman and stuck a gun right into his jaw and shot him point blank. Bruce Wayne can survive a lot, but a bullet to the brain, still pretty questionable. Although I feel like he would somehow be so prepared that he would know that was gonna happen, so maybe Bruce Wayne isn't the best example to use there.
Number 7. Magic. Magic's main weakness is her own emotions. She is capable of both good magic and dark magic, and when she feels intense emotions, if she gives in to it, it can actually turn her dark, transforming her into her dark child persona, a sort of demonic and somewhat evil version of herself. So she's got similar problems to DC's Raven, of having to be careful about how strongly she feels about something. Having to not feel emotions as intensely for fear of what you do is about as serious as it is ridiculous. These weaknesses in comics seem to be given to the most powerful characters, because how else do you make them relatable and at least somehow defeatable? I mean, when Magik actually has all of her magical abilities, she's pretty OP.
In at 6, AK-47s. Or just guns in general. Okay, yes, this is a rather dark number, but you know it's true. While some heroes would be exempt from this harming them, like Superman for example, definitely could withstand a barrage of bullets, others who do not have that invulnerability would be majorly susceptible to gun wounds. We recently saw in Heroes in Crisis how devastating a mass shooting in the superhero world could be. It was a reminder that superheroes are not as invulnerable as we assume them to be, especially if their guard is down or they are hit multiple times. Riffing off of our last number in something equally as dark and kind of preposterous to think about in comics.
Number 5. Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8.
In at number 4, time management. Superheroes have lives too, you guys, and if there is one thing we've learned from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's hard to strive for a life of normalcy when you've got to kick evil's butt. Often heroes are forced to choose between regular life stuff and saving lives, the latter being a quite demanding responsibility. I mean, Superman even quit once upon a time because of this, and I mean, he almost immediately returned to being a hero when he realized that Metropolis was kinda screwed without him, but still! If a villain really wanted to grind a hero down and had the patience to do so, they could learn about their hero's schedule, figure out their secret identity of course, and then plan a series of attacks at times that would be really inconvenient for their foe. Just hack their iCloud and take a look at their calendar. And then wait for their life to gradually fall apart and affect their superheroing. Wait till they're already vulnerable and then strike when they're most stressed, distracted, and foggy-minded. It's a little manipulative, sure, but I mean, as far as some villains are concerned, whatever gets the job done, right?
Number 3, Iceman. Bobby is actually one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvelverse, and yet people might not always think of him when it comes to some of the most powerful mutants around. This is because what often holds Robert Drake back is his own imagination. Iceman has actually been capable of accomplishing insane feats with his powers, and may have been capable of that the entire time. He can create sentient ice golems and change not only his own form from ice to water, but he can also do that to others as well. What has prevented him from this? Well, his lack of imagination that he could do it. This fact also makes me wonder if this is true for other mutants apart from Bobby. Like, could all mutants just be a lot stronger if they were just more creative? Or in Rogue's case, if they believed in themselves more? Do they need to train less at Xavier's school and simply just take more elective arts courses and expand their minds? Or maybe some more therapy courses, deal with their stuff.
Moving on to number 2, identity reveal. Now you'd think with the number of villains who have discovered superheroes' identities over the years, there would be a lot more whistleblowing in comics. Case in point, the Joker. When he knew Batman's true identity to be Bruce Wayne, he covered for the Caped Crusader and didn't tell anyone. Partially because, you know, he was obsessed with him and wanted to get him himself, but, you know, he's a fun individual. Quite literally. Now this is partially because the Joker is insane and utterly obsessed with Batman, therefore does not want anyone else to finish him off. But what excuses do other villains have? Revealing a superhero's identity or trying to rip off their masks in battle to expose them to the public would have a drastic effect on the character. It would ruin their private life, put them and all of their loved ones at risk constantly, and make it next to impossible to retain any sort of normalcy in their lives. A revealed identity though has helped some heroes rather than hindered them in the past. The likes of Ozymandias, for example, who used his fame to build an empire, or the Great Machine in Brian K. Vaughan's Ex Machina, who revealed his own identity to benefit his turn to politics. But generally we think it may hinder more than help in many cases, so it's surprising that more villains don't use it as a calming tactic to get what they want, although there are quite a few who have done that in the past. And last but not least, in at number 1, wardrobe malfunction. And no, we are not talking the likes of Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake, friends, and that is a bit of an aged reference, so if you know it just makes me feel old. When you think of death by cape, you often think of one of 2 famous instances. The first is Doctor Strange being strangled by his cloak in Marvel's Ultimatum. The second is Dollar Bill, one of the vigilantes on the Minutemen team in the 30s and 40s from Watchmen. The latter got his cape stuck in a revolving door, and a smart criminal used that opportunity to shoot him point blank. When you consider how effective using a hero's wardrobe against them could be, it's almost surprising that there aren't more villains trying to grab hold of heroes' capes to yank them close, strangle them, or put them in some sort of precarious position.